Yes, please. I'm sorry, 8:26 through 35. Chapter 8, verse 26 through 35.
Now an angel of the Lord said to Philip, go south on the road, the desert road that goes down from Jerusalem to Gaza. So he started out, and on his way he met with an Ethiopian eunuch, an important official in charge of all the treasury in Candace, queen of the Ethiopians.
Mm-hmm.
This man had gone to Jerusalem to worship, and on his way home was sitting in his chariot reading the book of Isaiah, the prophet. The Spirit told Philip. I guess I went as far as you wanted to, right?
Through 35.
Okay. The Spirit told Philip, go to that chariot and stay near it. Then Philip ran down to the chariot and heard him reading Isaiah the prophet. Do you understand what you are reading? Philip asked. How can I, he said, unless someone explains it to me? So he invited Philip to come down and sit with him. The eunuch was reading this passage from Scripture. He was led like a sheep to the slaughter, and like a lamb before the shearer is silent. So he did not open his mouth. In his humiliation, he was deprived of justice. Who can speak of his descendants? For his life was taken from the earth. The eunuch asked Philip, tell me, please, who is this prophet talking about, himself or someone else? And Philip began with that very passage of Scripture that told him the good news about Jesus.
Thank you, Jan. Here's Philip. After Christ has walked the earth, and he's teaching this Ethiopian eunuch in his Lexus as they're driving along the road to Damascus about what Elijah just read from us from the Scriptures, didn't he? He began at that very same Scripture, and he taught him Jesus. No doubt. So here we have another example then of Jesus coming to life, and here is a description of the man. Let me just ask a few of these questions. How was Jesus born? He was born of a what? Virgin. Was that prophesied? Yes. Everybody nod your head up and down. Yes, it was. Who was he born to? And? A virgin, yes. Mary and? Joseph, yes. And where did they live? He was born in Bethlehem, but they lived in Nazareth. Yes. Prophesied. In fact, Marcia, you read the verse prophesying of where Jesus was to be born. Where was he to be born? Bethlehem. Important because there's two Bethlehems. Which one? The Bethlehem of Judah or of Judea. Yes. So here we know a little bit more about the man Jesus. Did he? Yes. I'm sorry.
How long have you known me?
I don't know. A long time. What did I call you?
20? Do you know my name?
Isn't it Marcy? I'm sorry. Darcy. I'm sorry. Okay, I'm a little wound up here. One more rotation. Thank you, Darcy. Now I'm dizzy. All right. Let me ask you another thing. Did Jesus have a family? He did. Did he have brothers? Did he have sisters? Everybody turn to the book of Acts again. Chapter 1, verse 14. What do we know about the man, Jesus? Did I get the passage right? 1:14? Janine, read that for us.
Acts 1:14.
Yes.
These all with one accord continued steadfastly with the women and Mary, the mother of Jesus,
and his brethren. And my translation actually says his brothers, but there's Jesus and his family. So we're broadening that picture. Remember the window? We're broadening that window for all of us every time we read of a prophecy or a description of this man, Jesus. We learn more about him. Okay. Last one. How old was Jesus at the time of his death?
I think that's 33.
I'm sorry, go ahead, Katie. 33 years old. Young man. Let me ask a parallel question. How old was Alexander the Great when he conquered the world? No, he was 33 when he finished conquering the world. Just an interesting parallel there. But look at the impact that that man had on the world. And yet it's faded into history. Look at the impact that Jesus has had on the world, and he's still alive today. We know a little bit more about him. Now we're going to shift gears a little bit. And we're going to start putting what we know about the man Jesus to the context. So, let's talk about Palestine. Now, if you're from Ohio, you would pronounce that Palestine, but it's Palestine. Palestine is the setting, if you will, of Jesus walking the earth. Right? So what do we know about Palestine? Because just as the setting has an influence on the man, Jesus, man has an influence on the setting. And Palestine is a wealth of history. So, first of all, where is Palestine? Who can describe where we'll find Palestine? Matthew's map up there. It's on the Mediterranean Sea. It's on the east end of the Mediterranean Sea. And how far does the Mediterranean Sea expand? It starts at Palestine and it goes how far? All the way to... Keep going. I'm sorry, how far does the Mediterranean Sea go? What's that? I heard somebody say it. Spain, yes. It goes all the way to the Atlantic Ocean. The Mediterranean Sea is a big, big chunk of water. If you don't have a boat, how do you go from Spain to Egypt? You travel TWA, right? 2 weak ankles. You walk around the end of the Mediterranean Sea. And that's important because there is a confluence of routes, of travel paths that go around the east end of the Mediterranean Sea. And guess which country they pass right through? Everybody say Palestine. Yes, travel routes, major trading routes. If you're down in Egypt and you want to trade with Babylon, you've got to march right through Palestine. Yes, he could. He could take the shortcut, couldn't he? All right, Jan. Move up to the front row, buddy. Let me ask you, what is the climate like in Palestine? What was that? Arid. Yes, it is. And what does that mean? Yeah, a lot of moisture. Fairly close to the equator, so would you guess it's kind of like Greenland? Or the opposite? Greenland's full of glaciers. Palestine is full of sand. It is a very arid, dry country. Guess, Gabe, go ahead.
I was just going to say, when I hear the word Palestine, I think of camels and desert and tumbleweeds.
Yeah, not a lot of tumbleweeds. A lot of camels, a lot of desert. Travel by foot, travel by 2 week ankles. So I'm just going to share with you a little bit of my experience with Uncle Sam. A few years ago, Uncle Sam decided that he was going to send a battalion of Marines to a place called Turkey. And the thought was if Israel and Syria and Jordan all go to war, this battalion of Marines would be just up the coast, about 300 miles from there, and we would be in a perfect position to render aid. 1970. So Jack and his fellow Marines arrive on the beachhead, and we get our big trucks and all our equipment, and we started heading inland. And the next thing you know, it looks like a dust storm. You just can't hardly see. Why? Because the earth was so dry, it's just powdery dry, that when you walk, I want you to imagine you've just taken out a big bag of powdered sugar and you dumped it on the floor and you stepped down on it with your foot. What would happen? The dust would just rise up, wouldn't it? That dust is 4 or 5 inches thick everywhere you walked. Everywhere we drove until we got way up into the high country, and that's where we set up our radar. But even up there, it's very, very dry. And the people carefully tended their little gardens, including carrying water to the plants because they wouldn't survive without it. It's very dry, very arid, and very hot. The difference is at night, when the sun goes down, almost immediately you can sense the feel and the change of the air because there's no moisture to hold the heat in. It's just gone. And so there's going to be a variation in temperature, 30 to 40 degrees from the daytime and the sun to the nighttime. It's that quick to cool off. So in the daytime, you dress like Jan in a short sleeve shirt, but at night you better put your field jacket on because it's going to get cold. Just some of what we experience of the climate of the area. All right, this land called Palestine. Matthew read a couple verses this morning, how interesting that fell in with our class this morning. Palestine, or the promised land, was promised to who? Abraham and the children of Israel. That's the promised land. Jesus, he's a Jew. He's part of that promise. That's the land promised to the Jews. Now, when it came time for Israel to inherit the land or to occupy that land, did they do the things that God told them to do?
No.
Not so much, right?
They were supposed to get rid of all the other people.
Excellent. They were to destroy who?
Palestinians.
Yeah. They were literally to destroy the people of the land. All of them. The second thing that God said was, don't marry the daughters of the people who live there. Well, if you destroyed them all, there wouldn't be any daughters so don't intermarry. And the last thing God told him, and he's very specific about it, what did he say about the idols? Don't bow down. How do we write that? Don't bow down to the idols. Don't worship the idols of those people in the land in which I am sending you. Don't do any of those things. And of course, Israel did what? They didn't destroy all the people. They did intermarry. And they brought in the idol worship. And in fact, one of the tribes almost immediately went to idolatry. The last lands to be conquered were the lands that were assigned to Dan, way up in the northern end. And by the time that they get the armies together and they've gone forward and conquered the land, they get to the land that Dan is to occupy, they're already worshiping idols. And they set up high places and they just completely turned from God. And later on, if you'll remember back when Matthew was talking to us about Revelation, there was a tribe that was actually missing from the quote in Revelations. You remember which tribe that was missing? The tribe of Dan. They had gone immediately into idolatry. Okay. Turn my page here. How long has it been in Palestine and land of promise before they divided? There's Palestine. What happened? There was a rift amongst them very early on, wasn't there? And the southern kingdom and the northern kingdom. And of course, they got along just fine, right? Because they were brothers. No. It wasn't long before the northern kingdom had become so idolatrous, had turned so far from God, that God sent the day of judgment upon them. And the northern kingdom was actually conquered by the Assyrians in somewhere around 722 BC. The Assyrians come in, they wipe them out, they take certain numbers of them into captivity, and they become the slaves of the Assyrians. They're the people that works in the mines, and they're the people that did all the dirty jobs and literally died. Okay? About 6, Babylon comes down, and first they conquer city by city in the southern kingdom, until finally in about 586, Jerusalem itself falls. So we've had 2 or more major invasions of Palestine. What happens to a land when it gets invaded by a conquering army? I want everybody to close their eyes for a second and remember the last time you were watching TV and you saw an account of the Ukraine being invaded by Russia. And what's the image to your face, to your mind? It's not pretty, isn't it? You're not seeing pretty trees and nice green grass and cute, quaint little homes. You're seeing death and destruction. That's what happens when a land is invaded. That's what happened in Palestine. And so you're beginning to see that this land flowing with milk and honey that turned away from God is suffering the consequences. And it's shaping not only the land, but the people that live there. So, am I quitting on you, Mark? There we go. Okay. Somewhere around 536, some of the children of Israel are allowed to go back to their home. You remember the story of Babylon that's changed hands now? It's the Medes and the Persians. And they're going to grant them the right to go back. Darius is going to grant them the right to go back to their land. Okay? They've been gone for up to 70 years. The first cities that were conquered, the last city that was conquered, 50 years from when Jerusalem was conquered until they're allowed to go back, but a total of about 70 years. And what are they? Yes?
Is that the time of Ezra or Nehemiah?
I started to say yes, Wilma, but I got to look that up because Nehemiah is part of the rebuilding, isn't he? Yeah. So
Ezra was before Nehemiah, wasn't he?
I think the answer is yes, Wilma, but I better look that up. But I think the answer is yes. but they're going to be integral in the prophesying and the teaching of the people to rebuild the temple once they're returned. Yeah. Okay, so we're closing in on the time of Jesus, but look what happened to that land flowing of milk and honey. Question: what tribes returned in 536 BC? None of the tribes of the northern tribes ever returned. They're just gone, and they're gone to history. But the southern kingdom, that remnant was allowed to return. And do you remember which tribes that represented? Judah? Oops, J-U-D. Yep, and Benjamin, yep, and the Levites. Yes, from which the priests would come, yes. So we went from 12 tribes and that great diversity down to 3 tribes. Is that going to have an impact on the land, an impact upon the nation of Israel? Yep, everybody nod your head up and down. Yes, it will. That's going to have a major impact on the children of Israel. All right, question. What did they find when they got back? What did they find? Destruction, yes. What else? And some conquering armies did exactly that. They salted the land so you couldn't grow crops. I don't know if that happened here, Jan, in any great detail, but that was one of the things that conquering armies tended to do. They left the land desolate. There's something else important here, and that's when the invading armies came into the northern kingdom. Did they go out into every little village and round everybody up? Or did they just go and attack the major cities and plunder them? And so there's a remnant here, and there's a little bit there, and there's a few over here, and there's a couple of people hidden over in the caves there. And so there were a limited number of people that were left behind. And of course, they all intermarried, and they became a land unto themselves. And they had a special name. See if this rings a bell with anybody. Samaritans. Those bespectacled people that live up in that northern kingdom. I'm not even going to walk through their land. Starting to sound familiar? Yeah. And Christ teaches, who's your brother? Who is your brother? Well, let me tell you a little parable. There was a man on his way, and he fell among thieves. And who rescued him? Who saved him? Yeah, one of those bespectacled people from up north. The Samaritans are there. And if they'd occupied your house, Linda, because you were gone, taken into captivity, they kind of put the walls back together and stuck a couple of panes of glass back up on the windows, and they're living in your house. You're going to be pretty happy with that when you get back? No, probably not. Imagine that that's what they have done to your land. Okay? And they're not really happy to see the Israelites come back. In fact, you better keep your sword by your side and your spear and your shield. Defend what's yours. Am I dying, Mark? Okay. The Mosaic law the law of the Lord, the law of the Torah, the law of the Levites, the priests of Moses, the law of Moses, is going to be so eroded that the only place you're really going to find the Mosaic law used is in the worship service. Yeah. Many of the regions are going to, well, yeah, they're going to do lip service to God and to the law. But by the time we read the last book of the Old Testament, Micah, what did he tell them? Your hearts are far from him. Don't bother worshiping God, as he isn't listening. You have done this, you've done this, you've done this, you've done this, and you bring a simple sacrifice, and you suppose that makes everything okay. You're going to come in on Saturday and on the day of worship and throw a couple of coins into the treasury and call it square. And then you're going to go right back to your idolatrous living. No. The law of Moses is just about going to be extinct. You're only going to find it actually restored in some of the rural areas. And let me share with you one of those rural areas. Can everybody read that? Galilee. Will that show up again? Some of the old ways that are still practiced. I want everybody to turn to Mark chapter 14 and verse 70. Let me tell you what that means. Who can read that for us?
When evening came, Jesus arrived with the 12. That's Mark 14:17.
70.
Again he denied it. After a little while, those who were standing near said to Peter, "Surely you are one of them, for you are a Galilean."
How did she know he was a Galilean? His what? Accent. But more than that, his dress, his manner of speech. He must be one of those guys from that rural area up there. Think Amish. The old ways are still practiced in Galilee. The rest of the country, the rest of Palestine, if you will, because of the conquering influence, because of the dilution of the law, has changed into something that no longer resembles the old ways. Except in those rural areas of like Galilee. If that paints a picture in your mind, just fan forward here a little bit and say to yourself, where did Jesus go when he wanted some peace and quiet? Where did Jesus go to speak to the people? Where did he go to deliver the Sermon on the Mount? It wasn't downtown Jerusalem, it was Galilee. Yes, and we're going to see that crop again and again and again. So this should start to give you a picture through our window, if you will, of Jesus and the man as we walk with Jesus. All right, we're going to look at a major change now. If the land of milk and honey no longer looks like it used to, if it's been ravaged, if it's been changed, if it's been watered down, if you will, watch what happens now. Anybody recognize these guys? Alexander the Great brings his army in, and he conquers all of Palestine in about 325 BC. I'm not talking about just one or two little cities here and there. I'm talking about the whole area. In fact, the Greeks conquered just about all the world, if you will. They were huge, they were powerful, they just kept growing and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and conquering more and more and more and more. These folks are going to produce something that will remember, I got to spell this for you. Hellenizing. The Greeks left behind what is referred to as the Hellenizing influence. Look how we're going to change Israel now. They conquered all of Palestine, and here's what the Greeks stressed. They stressed knowledge, and culture. How many of you have ever heard of the Greek tragedies? Yeah, we all had to read about them in the 9th grade or the 10th grade or whatever. Okay? Think knowledge and think culture. Everybody turn to Acts chapter 7. Acts chapter 7 and verse 16. The Hellenizing influence is going to have a tremendous impact upon Palestine. Tremendous impact. Janine, do you have that? Could you read that for us?
7:16.
Yes.
And they were carried over unto Shechem and laid in the tomb that Abraham brought for a price in silver, the sons of Hamor and Shechem.
Where did I go wrong on that one? Was that 7:16? All right, forget it. I don't know where I was going with that. That's obviously not what I wanted. All right. Were there intermarriages? Yes. Actually, I do remember now where I was going with that. What happened to our brother Paul when he went to Athens? Go ahead, Diane.
Verse 16,
16.
while Paul was waiting for them in Athens, he was greatly distressed to see the city was full of idols.
Full of idols. The Greek influence. And if we go on to read more about it, what were the Athenians famous for? They all went and they sat in the coffee shops and they met in the marketplace. Mm-hmm. And they discussed what? The newest and the latest thing. They were all about learning something new. And they said to Paul, we'll hear more from you. Some of them said, "Dang, get away with this guy." But some of them said, "No, let's hear more of this. That's a new idea. This concept, somebody rose from the dead and he's teaching something new. Let's hear more about it." Knowledge and culture. And it's going to do more than that. The official language of the Palestine, of all that conquered area, the official language became what? Greek. This one right here. You're no longer going to speak Hebrew. You're no longer going to speak Ethiopian or whatever. You're going to speak Greek. And if you're going to write, you're going to write in Koine, Greek. You want to do business in the marketplace? You want to do business with the government officials? You want an official document file? It's got to be written in Greek. Did that have an influence? Did that have an influence on Palestine? Absolutely. Okay, there's two bills. I'm going to give you one more. And here is another really, really important one. Aramaic. Not only do you have to read and write in Greek, but the common language, this Greek, if you will, is going to become colloquialized, if you will, and you're going to speak, the common man is going to speak in Aramaic. That word, keep in file right here in your mind, because we're going to run into that again and again and again, but we're going to change the language, we're going to change the written language, we're going to change the common man's language. The only place that you're going to hear Hebrew spoken is in the synagogue or the temple. Think Amish, if you will, or think Catholic, Roman Catholic, when all the services were in Latin. The only time you're going to hear Hebrew is in the temple or in the synagogue. Did everybody speak Hebrew back then? The rural areas did, and they practiced the old law. But if you went in downtown Jerusalem and you're riding the bus line, you're probably going to hear Aramaic spoken. And the dress is going to be different. Now, the reason that this is important is I want you to start looking through that Johari window again and lining up that window with the man Jesus and seeing the context in which he walked the earth. Okay, that's all for today. Thank you very much. We'll see you next week.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you.
Yes, you're welcome.